Thank you very much. I want to thank the folks on the previous panel for warming this group up for me, I think. And I have a mommy voice, so if I get away from this microphone, I think you can still hear me. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I did not wear my flak jacket. I didn't think I needed it. I'm hopeful I'm not proved wrong by that, but I want to talk a little bit about what I call disruptive technologies, because that's really what we're talking about with MOOCs and competency-based instruction. Anything that's different than what happened when we were in school. I mean, that's really basically what we're talking about. Now, think about how traditional we are. We're using the same alphabet that was in place with the Phoenicians, okay? We are using the same books that have been printed since the 16th century, sometimes literally, but usually figuratively in that. I mean, we've been producing books since, so we haven't had a lot of new stuff come along. When we look in our classrooms, one of the complaints that colleges and universities have about K-12 institutions is that you can walk into a school today and it looks just like it did 5 years ago when we were in school. Okay, you still have the desk lined up, the students' names are still on the desk. That's why we have habituated to sitting in the same seat, you know, every time we go into a room. Once we claim it, we get upset if somebody else is sitting in our seat, because since kindergarten, they said, this is your seat with your name. You should always have your bottom in this seat. So when somebody comes along and starts talking about distance learning and offering courses where you don't have to see students, we panic, let alone MOOCs or massive online courses that were never designed for credit nor to charge anybody money. And yet they have quickly turned on both of those dimes, and now we're getting ACE to look at them and see, can we get your seal of approval for them so that we can consider offering credit for them. And we're gonna make a little money, since our budgets have been cut, by charging people, you know, not just to take them, but to give us money for considering whether we're gonna accept them for credit or not. So we've got a lot of changes. I want to commit to you, just to help you get, you know, frame reference that I have, of some of the other changes. I started teaching in 1974. I was 22 years old, right out of graduate school, defended my thesis on a Friday and started teaching Monday, and I taught 18 hours from courses I had never taken with books I had never read. So I got prepared for this job long time ago. Okay, baptism by fire took on a whole new meaning there. But I remember going from a 16mm projector to VHS tapes. Oh my. No longer did I have to splice celluloid. It was wonderful. Or even before that, Selectric typewriters, as opposed to the old, oh, I'm seeing heads shake. Some of you are still a little young. Take you back further. The first real technology for me was a Princess telephone. Remember, we used to have those old clunky black desktops, and they went to these little trim lines that actually came in different colors. We have been dealing with disruptive technologies for a very long time. But most of them we have perceived as being an advantage to what we were doing, as opposed to a stumbling block to what we were doing. Mostly because our jobs didn't depend on them. You know, we weren't trying to interpret their use for a variety of different audiences, and we could make the determination personally whether we wanted to adapt to it or not. It was one reason when the cell phones came out, some of us were slower to gravitate toward them than others, because I really don't want to have you contact me that often. First of all, ignorance really is bliss. If I don't know, it's really okay. And I can say, I don't know because my computer wasn't with me. Now, you got a computer in your pocket. I did break down and buy an iPhone this Christmas. I've been living on my BlackBerry, and I love my BlackBerry, but everybody else was going to, and I had an iPad, so I figured, why not? Okay, now I feel like I got two of the same thing. One's just a little bigger than the other. But we have had different technologies all along. From an accrediting standpoint, we have also undergone disruption. A lot of times. We started, as you may or may not know, as an association in 1895. We've been around a long time. And it was some of your institutions that formed this organization of a peer review process to kind of hold each other up and make sure that, you know, the reputation of one wasn't going to pull down the other, that everybody had a good, strong reputation so that people would feel good about coming to all of the institutions. And we've made it a membership organization that was a lot tougher to get into initially than it is now, even though it's still tough now to get into. And we went through the community colleges not coming in until the 1960s, even though there were some that were earlier than that, and even the HBCUs didn't come in until a long time later, because it was like pledging the fraternity or sorority. You got to pass this test before you can get in. So we've always been selective about who joined this club called SAC-COC. And I have to tell you that I'm trying to get people to start talking about SAC-COC because we are now separately accredited from our parent company. Now, I know trying to get people to change from 1895 to 2013 is going to be difficult. But I like that because every time Mark Elgart, who's my counterpart on K-12, does something to one of the local public schools, I get all the phone calls. So I want everybody to know we are not SACS, we are SACS Commission on Colleges, SAC-COC. So if you'd help me with that, then maybe I can get the media to understand who they're really talking about. But nonetheless, our application process is as stringent now as a GRE was to us when we were thinking of going to graduate school, or as we perceived the ACT and SAT to be when we were looking at going to undergraduate school. It's this, oh my God, the fear and anxiety of getting through that process. This is your process. I tell the presidents all the time, my staff and I are much more creative than these standards. We could have you jumping through more hoops than you ever knew existed if you left it up to us to come up with the standards. All of our institutions make up the membership that create the rules by which you have to live. There are a few exceptions, and we identify them in our standards. We call them federal requirements, because we want to make sure that you blame the right people. Okay? Now, there are some of our standards that are also federal standards. But we had our standards before we even hooked up with the feds, because it was not until the 1950s when the GI Bill came along that the federal government wanted to have a way to ensure that the money they were spending on GI's tuition was going to quality institutions and not some fly-by-night organizations. So it's only been since the 50s that we've agreed that we would include in our reviews some of the things that the federal government also wanted to review, so we put them together. This is where a lot of the new regs are coming in, and the concerns are coming about what do we do with massive online credits, and what do we do with competency-based credits. About 5 years ago, when the last reauthorization of the Higher Education Act took place, it was also about that time that there was a major explosion in the enrollments at for-profit institutions. They are the smallest segment of higher education, but they collect the largest percentage of federal financial aid. And so they do things differently. They don't meet students face-to-face, 16 hours, in a semester, or for 16 weeks a semester, 3 hours each week, and have 2 hours of homework each week, to equal 1 credit hour. We don't know how they're doing it. We don't know when students show up to take the instruction. We don't know when they do homework, and yet they were collecting the same amount of federal financial aid that you all were. And so the Fed said, we got to do something about this. We can't be just giving our money away or taking their word for it. So that's when they started putting in requirements like the student authentication that says if you offer a distance learning program, have to authenticate that the student who registers is the same one who takes the course, takes the test, and gets the credit. Because there were horror stories where students were getting an ID and then selling it to somebody who was smarter than they were so that that smarter person could actually do all the work, but I would get the credit because I paid you to do that for me. And we had no way of knowing who was doing that because we couldn't see who was doing it. And so now each of us as an institution has to have some way to authenticate that enrollment and participation. When we negotiated those rules, they wanted to mandate that you use retinal scans or fingerprints as the ways to authenticate. And I am such a shy retiring person that I raised my hand reluctantly and asked, "What the hell's going to pay for that?" You know, this was right at the downturn of the economy. You know, you all were complaining about the dues you have to pay me, so I knew you weren't going to feel real happy about having to put in all this new technology. And we had a student in the group that says, and if it's going to cost more money, you got to let the students know before you charge them for it. Okay? So they backed down and said, okay, we won't mandate those two technologies. However, as those technologies become more affordable and more commonplace, you will be expected to put that in. The same thing with state authorization, because many of those large online institutions were headquartered in one region but doing business all over the country. There were states that were, concerned about the quality. There was the federal government concerned about the proliferation of courses all over the universe. So they put in a rule and said, if you're going to offer a distance learning course, then you have to be registered, if you will, in the state in which the student is enrolled. Okay? So now here you've got 3,000 institutions that suddenly have to figure out which state agency in each of 50 states do I contact, and how much money is it going to cost me per each state? We know of at least one state on the eastern seaboard that they said cost $60,000 per institution to be registered in that particular state. It's a big moneymaker for states. So we've got all kind of disruption going on. What does that have to do with your local accrediting body? Anybody here, other than the lady from Missouri, from outside of the southern region? Okay, so what I'm going to say still applies to you as well, because all 7 of the regional accreditors communicate with each other daily almost, but certainly regularly enough, so just pretend I'm talking whoever your executive. What region are you from? Yeah, just pretend that I'm Sylvia. That's a stretch, I know, but pretend it anyway. So we are under as much pressure as you are. We're under pressure from the federal government to make sure that what you're doing is, the right thing to do. We're under pressure from you to make sure that we clarify what it is we have to do so that you can not only pass our muster, but also continue to get federal financial aid. And you're under pressure from students who say, I don't want to be here anyway, so I want to get out of here as quickly as I can. And then you've got pressure from the general business community saying, hurry up and get these people out of college because I need them to work. So there's enough pressure to go around. We're not going to worry about any of it. We're going to take it one day at a time and move as best we can. Okay? Can we agree to do that? I heard the frustration from the registrar back here. We're being mandated to take credits from institutions and we don't know anything about them. You're being mandated, as I understand it, to accept credits from other COC accredited institutions. I will accept responsibility on behalf of the board that makes that decision. You don't have to worry about that. They're okay. All right? I would also take responsibility for any institutional credit that comes from any of the other regionally accredited institutions, because all of them provide a rigorous peer review process. So you don't have to worry about the credits that come in. All right? Any institution that's not regionally accredited, I'm not willing to accept that responsibility. Does that make you feel better?
Yeah, I don't accept them if they're not regionally accredited either.
I'm sorry?
I said I don't accept them if they're not regionally accredited either. So, yeah, it doesn't.
I was going to say the caveat to that is every national and regional accrediting body and specialized accreditor that is recognized by the Department of Education has to go through a rigorous review. We have to be accredited just like you do. Okay? And so if they are USDOE accredited or even CHIA accredited, I would bet that they're probably okay. Feel better? A little bit. All the registrars in the office can exhale just a little bit. Okay, that's good. Because over the last 5 years, the budget for federal financial aid has doubled in 5 years. That's another reason that you've got this pressure from Washington on getting it right. Senator Harkin, who's a Democrat from Iowa, has a for-profit institution in his state that has had more bad press than Carter has liver pills. And so he's been, remember those Carter's little liver pills? Okay, good. have to check my audience. Sometimes I go, who is Carter? What is she talking about? Okay. And so unfortunately, one for-profit is tending to get all of them painted that way, and they're really not that deserving. We have 15 for-profit institutions in our region. You wouldn't even know it because you don't hear the bad press about them. Most of them are not traded on the New York Stock Exchange. They're privately owned, small institutions, that are just out there to help students and to make a little money as they go along. It's the bigger ones, where you have a group of investors who, I want to see the money first, that sometimes they have taken some shortcuts that haven't always been the right shortcuts that have gotten into trouble. But one thing that has helped that is most of those institutions are now regionally accredited. They have come into the family. They've gone through the same review that you all have at your institutions. And so they understand what you're up against as well. So that's why I said if they're regionally accredited, if they're recognized by DOE or CHIA, I don't think you need to worry about whether to accept them or not. Okay? Now, ACE has always been the organization on whom we've depended to say, yeah, this is a good course to consider accepting. Now notice how I phrase that. Because you as institutions have the final word on whether you'll accept credits or not. And that's the good news. The bad news is you are the ones who decide whether to accept the credits or not. All right? From a student standpoint, you wreak havoc with students' lives. I worked in the Virginia Community College system for 18 years. It is 23 individually accredited institutions that has one governing board. Does that sound familiar? Okay. And we used to not accept each other's credits. Same board. What's up with this? Okay? So, let alone, Georgia schools accepting Tennessee schools, accepting Texas. I mean, it just doesn't happen. So that's why we've always depended on ACE to say, yes, wherever you're located, this is a course that has been reviewed, because they treat courses like we treat institutions. They look at the rigor, they look at the qualifications of the faculty, they look at the content of the courses, they look at everything you wanted to know about that course but were afraid to ask. Just like we look at everything about an institution but you were afraid to ask. And so if they say it's a go, then you shouldn't worry about whether it's worth considering accepting for transfer or not. And so now we're dependent on them. I was quite surprised, actually, that they agreed to look at the courses from Coursera and under the MOOCs because, again, they were never designed for credit and weren't supposed to charge anybody anything for them. But they have now opened a door with which I'm going to have to deal because now you're dealing with the fact that they've identified courses that had not been intended for transfer or acceptability, but now can be. Whew. Boy, we all got job security for a while, don't we? Okay. So this issue is not new for us. We have been working with our institutions for a very long time who choose to do things differently. When distance learning first came out, that was different. Even before that, when correspondence education first came out, largely in the prison population, that's where the correspondence courses were, quite widespread. Because you got a captive audience, but they can't get to class, and you don't want to go lock up in the jail with them for any length of time. So we'll send you some paper, and you study and send it back to us. So ever since those are non-traditional, what we could call disruptive technologies. So we've had policies and practices in place that we think will accommodate all this stuff that's going on. And I only brought one copy. Because I just kind of ran off the office quickly. But I will leave this with Dr. Williams, and if you all want copies of this, we can get it. All you have to do is pick up our principles, because that's all this is telling you which of our principles we think already accommodates all this stuff, okay? No matter where the course originates, whether it's Udacity or Coursera, or it's coming in from Standard, or Stanford or whatever, you all as an institution have to decide whether you're going to accept the credit or not. Doesn't matter. That's not going to change. Whether it's a distance learning course, whether it's a competency-based course, whether it's a television course, doesn't matter. Every institution has to make that determination because you're the ones giving the credit. Even though it was earned someplace else, before you put your Columbus State, Albany State, Georgia Tech seal of approval on it. You have to review it and see if indeed it matches what it is that you're doing, okay? These are our principles. I think $4.95, get your own personal copy, or you can get it for free if you download it off the web, either one. There are not but 93 of them. For those of you who've been in higher ed more than 10 years and in this region, you remember the criteria, of which there were 450 standards of must and should. I feel like the Gestapo. You must do this, you should do this. You know, and every institution in which I've ever worked has been a SACS accredited institution. So I remember those days well. This is a piece of cake compared to that. The difference is you have to defend what it is you're doing. You were talking faculty credentials earlier. We used to have this hard and fast rule that you had to have a master's degree and 18 graduate hours in whatever you were going to teach. We got rid of that requirement in 2002, folks. Some of you have not heard that. Okay? We got rid of that when we adopted these principles in 2002. We have said, if your institution wants to continue to use that standard, knock yourself out. But please stop telling people that we require this, because I'm tired of the phone calls and emails where I have to then refer people to section 3.7.1, faculty credentials, which I have almost memorized, you know, that doesn't say anything about having to have a master's degree and 18 graduate hours. It says an institution has to have qualified people teaching their courses, period. That's the standard. Then it goes on to say, of course you should use academic credentials. You're an academic institution. Why wouldn't you require academic credentials? But if you don't, you got to come up with something. You can't just say, well, that's my husband's wife's second cousin 3 times removed. That ain't gonna fly. You have to have a standard. So this person only has a bachelor's degree, but they've got 20 years experience running a child care center, or they've got 30 years experience managing a savings and loan. Well, that may not be such a good example, but you have to have something that's gonna take the place of those academic credentials. And we leave it up to you to tell us why you think that person is qualified. Okay, now here's a question for you. You complained about the rigidity of the master's and 18 graduate hours. Now you're complaining about the flexibility that you have on this side. There's no making you folks happy. Okay? So that's why I said, if you felt comfortable with that master's and 18 graduate hours, you can still use that. That's fine. But be honest enough with your faculty and the applicants and your adjuncts that you're getting rid of because they don't meet that, and tell them it's because you have decided that that's what they have to meet. Stop telling them because I'm going to call you out. I will. I'm sorry. You did not hear them correctly, I'm sure, because they would not have told you we have that requirement, because in 2002, when we adopted these, we got rid of that requirement. Anyway, in this book, we have what we have called core requirements, which are as closely related to those must statements as we used to have. And we have comprehensive standards, which are as closely related to those should statements as we used to have. For those of you who have not gone through the reaffirmation of accreditation process, if when a team comes in and reviews you, you get a recommendation and a core requirement, you will not be reaffirmed. You may still be accredited, but you won't get the 10-year seal of approval until you clean that up. You can get a recommendation and a comprehensive standard, and that won't happen. But if it's in one of those core requirements, one of those gotta-haves, then they'll say, well, you're not quite ready. Got to keep you pledging just a little bit longer. Go fix that, send me back a report, and then the board will say, okay, now you can come in for the full 10 years. Okay? Core requirements, those must things that we think address this disruptive technology that we have, are 2.7.1, which is the one that talks about program length. Right now, we say that if you're offering an associate's degree, you have to have 60 semester hours or the equivalent in order to give that degree. And if it's a bachelor's degree, it's 120 hours. And if you have something different, you have to explain it to us, Lucy. Okay? We have one called 2.7.2, which is program content. that says that you offer degree programs that embody a coherent a course of study that is compatible with your mission and is based upon fields of study appropriate to higher education. When you're starting to bring MOOCs in, you're going to have to demonstrate how that fits your mission or how that fits the major that you have identified. Okay, how does the content of that particular, or how does that life experience fit into the outcomes that you've identified for that program major? Those are the two core requirements that we think most impact these new disruptive technologies. We've got a slew of comprehensive standards. One of them is 3.4.4 that talks about the acceptance of academic credit. You have to tell us why you accept these disruptions as meeting the requirements for giving credit. Okay, there were 30 years in a military career, for example, in motorcycle repair. I mean, I don't speak military, pick something, okay? And that experience, we think, translates into these 15 semester hours or 30 semester hours or whatever in this automotive technology program or this engineering program or whatever. You have to show how you are fitting that stuff into the academic credit that everybody else who goes through a traditional program, they'll be the equivalent. 3.4.6 is the one that deals with practices of awarding credit. This one, right now you've got freshman level, sophomore level, junior, senior, upper division, lower division. You've got all this kind of stuff. Where is this going to fit? Where does this, this new competency-based course that they're bringing in, where does it fit into the curriculum? We've got 3.4.7, which is consortial relations. If you are accepting these things from other institutions, this is your question. How do you know that this is the quality that comes along with it, okay? By the demonstration of those competencies that students would have, for example, by whatever the description of the course was, by whatever the explanation and the certifications that the person brought with them from whatever the life experiences were. You have to be able to show that there. 3.4.8, which is non-credit to credit. Historically, and this would go from the AAS degree, that applied science degree, to a regular associate's or bachelor's degree. Historically, those degrees were not designed to transfer. There is no such animal as a course that is not designed to transfer anymore. I mean, there just isn't for all practical purposes. So you have to decide at your institution how you're going to translate that used to not be accepted for transfer credit into credit. Okay? Because if you're going to accept life experiences, then how can you turn down AAS credit? Especially if it was taken at an accredited institution whose faculty met the SAC-COC guidelines and everything else. 3.4.10, which is responsibility for curriculum. Even though, and that was a point that the folks from ACE I think were making toward the end of the presentation, even though they've said this is a great course, your faculty still have to approve that course. We had a situation at Lamar University in Texas where they contracted with a company to provide support services and some instruction for a Master's of Education program online. Their, what do they call them, coaches, their academic coaches still had to meet the same qualifications that a graduate TA would have to meet at one of your institutions, or an adjunct faculty member would have to meet at your institution. Because you have ultimate responsibility. You have to defend, when that's going on, your institution's transcript, that you've accepted it, that you've agreed that the content and the grade that the student earned was appropriate for your institution. 3.5.2 is the infamous 25% rule. All right? If you're going to put your name on somebody's degree and you're going to say, yes, this person has earned these credits and we're willing to give them a degree, 25% of that work still has to be done at your institution. Even if that's life experience, even if that's experiential learning or competency-based that they have tested at your institution, that can be included in that 25%, but 25% of the whole program still has to be done at your institution. And then 3.6.3 is institutional credits for a graduate degree. It's all the same kinds of thing. At least a third of the credits and a graduate degree have to be earned at the institution granting the degree. So we think that the curriculum is covered. We figure that the qualifications of the people teaching are covered. We figure all the stuff that they've thrown at us so far is already covered. The problem is they keep throwing stuff every day. I have to follow the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed just as religiously as you do to see what's new on the horizon out there. Because we don't get correspondence. You all get more correspondence from DOE than I do. Because you all get dear colleague letters that I never see. I have to read about those in the paper. Even though I keep telling Kay Gilcher, would you please send me a copy of this? You know, fortunately, either Inside Higher Ed or the Chronicle always puts a link to whatever the Dear Colleague letter was. Otherwise, we'd be uninformed, and yet I've got to enforce that you're doing what they tell you to do. Help me understand that one. Then there are three federal requirements. Remember I told you that we have our standards and there's some also federal requirements. Three of them that also we think plays into this. One of them is 4.4, which is program length again, which we already have covered. One is 4.8, which is their set of guidelines on distance and correspondence education. And then 4.9, which is definition of credit hour, which we already had covered under our own standards, but you know, they made a big deal out of putting them in freshly, so we do those as well. So right now, I think we're covered. All right? Now, just as I say that, I'm going to open this up for questions, and somebody is going to raise an issue that we haven't thought about yet, which is fine. That's why I brought my notebook so I could write it down. Let's see. Let me start with, was this gentleman who, yes, was talking about something earlier and they pointed me out. What was your issue? Do you remember?
Ladies and gentlemen, because we are videotaping this session, if you could wait until I bring you a mic so we get your question, as well as Dr. Whelan's response.
That or I can repeat it, one of the two. I don't mean to embarrass you. That was a question that I said I wanted to be sure to respond to.
Good afternoon, everyone. My question was about credential, because SACS well, I could have formulated the question wrong, but there was credential issues from SACS, and then there was also the fact that credential was not a major criteria for ACE during assessment.
It's because they're evaluating courses,
Yes.
not the people who teach them, but the content of the courses, which is why there's not an emphasis there on who the faculty member is that developed it necessarily, but what's in the course.
Yes.
That's why.
Okay.
We, on the other hand, are concerned about not only the content, but who is it that's espousing this content, and what else are they bringing to the table beside the course description. Yeah, that's why.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I know I'm the only thing standing between you and the bar, too, so.
There is no bar. There is no bar. There is food.
Maybe you may not be providing one, but that doesn't mean there is one.
I stand corrected.
Well, while you're thinking of another question, let me do two things. First of all, let me tell you, there's no such thing as a stupid question. There's one up here, too. I taught child psychology for years, and I had a woman, when we were talking about the advantages of breastfeeding babies, ask me if there were chocolate milk in black women's breast. Swear to God. If you've ever taught, everybody's got a story like that. And I had a reaction much like that. There were people who sat there hysterically thinking she really didn't ask that question. And there were others who said, did she really ask that question? But then there were some who went, I hadn't thought about that. So I did tell her that there were no flavoring packets in black women's breasts. But there's no stupid question, so don't be embarrassed. Yes, ma'am.
And a black woman has the microphone.
There
so
you go. Black woman's answering it too, so it's okay.
Question.
Yes.
This may be taking your previous statement in a way that you would not like me to, so I'm trying to undo my question before I ask it.
Won't be the first time.
At a university, who decides whether or not that those criteria for faculty? Because I'm a member of Faculty Senate, so I can hear the Senate buzzing in my ear about academic freedom and faculty senate being able to make these decisions, but this is the first that I had heard of the rule change from 2002. I know.
That's okay.
But
I'd like to say you're the only person in the region that had not heard that, but I'd be lying if I said that.
But it's very concerning to me because we have folks who have been in the field who have remarkable experience, may not have the academic pedagogy, but certainly could bring those critical thinking skills and abilities to our students. So for me, going back to my VPAA and my other folks are here too. So, but how can I go back and advocate for this type of at least consideration?
Well, first thing you do is don't tell people I said so, because I don't need them calling me. No, seriously. I would hope that there are people at your institution who have been to our annual meeting, who have been out on review teams, to have heard that conversation. It just kind of hadn't gotten to you yet. To answer your question, who actually makes that determination within an institution, that depends on the institution and how you hire faculty. Generally, a faculty committee will interview candidates after a job listing has been made, and then you pass that on up the ladder, and ultimately it's the president who makes that final determination. But he or she does that, right, Tim? With input up the way. And so, this is still, remember I told you we started in 1895. Change is slow, okay? So we know it's going to take a while. It's going to take more than 10 years for people to get used to this change. We are just approaching the last class of institutions to go through the reaffirmation process under the new principles. So there are at least 40 institutions for whom this was new information. Okay? And I know you're at one of those institutions. Don't tell me if you're not. But it's just going to come with time. And again, many institutions have said, we don't care what SAC-COC said in that flexibility. We like the black and whitedness, the clarity of it's either this or nothing at all. And that's perfectly fine. You don't have to change it. But we heard from too many institutions that said, but I have a lot of people who are qualified with life experiences that I can't count anywhere because they don't have the credential. We also had many of our community and technical colleges who said they don't have a master's degree in 18 hours in plumbing. or some of the fine arts areas either. You know, the MFA was Masters of Fine Arts was the highest level degree in fine arts for a very long time, and there are very few DFA programs. So, you know, you have to consider all that as well. That's why membership said, this is too rigid, we want some flexibility, so we put in the flexibility. Sure. Is there one here? Yes.
I have one. I was reading the article that was in the Chronicle this morning where we're waiting on some clarification, I guess, from US DOE on federal aid for competency-based programs.
Right.
Can you comment on where we are with SACs and regional accreditation in this waiting period, I guess?
The programs that are, my understanding is the programs that are waiting for DOE approval are where the entire degree is a competency-based degree, not a course or two. Because we've had those courses or two for a very long time. CLEP test is a competency-based exam, okay? And so, but we're talking about institutions where their entire program is competency-based. There's little, if any, face-to-face instruction. Western Governors is one of those, and then the institution up in Rhode Island, whose name of the institution, anybody remember what that is? Those are the only two right now, and they don't get federal aid. Is it New Hampshire? I thought it was Rhode Island. Is it New Hampshire? One of the New England states. I don't remember which one, but yeah. And see, they don't get federal financial aid right now for either of those institutions. That's the downside, you know, of coming up with something new and being the first one out there. After ACE has now come up with the MOOCs, and right now there's no federal financial aid to take those either. But, you know, all of that changes, and DOE is slower to change than SAC-COC is. And so it's going to take them a minute to feel comfortable because they're not all that comfortable with the online institutions, let alone, at least we know there's instruction going on there with the competency-based, how do we know how students are learning? And so all of that's got to be worked out, and they have to feel comfortable with it. That doesn't stop us from accepting it as part of your curricular offerings right now. okay? Because we've got all these rules and regulations in place that say that you have to explain these unique situations, okay? Yes?
Could you, Dr. Wheeling, could you clarify a little bit the 25% rule with regard to online collaborative degree programs?
Felita warned me that one was coming. If you, and I brought the policy, and I'm not going to bore you with the policy because it's just the nuts and bolts, but the bottom line is if you if you have 2 SAC-COC accredited institutions, or 3 or 4, that are working together to offer courses so that a student can get 1 degree but have input from 4 institutions, same rules apply, but whoever's name is going on that diploma, they have to have 25% of the instruction from that institution. Okay?
Good.
And it gets worse if it's a SAC-COC and a non-SAC-COC. You don't want me to go there. But yeah, the whole thing is somebody has to accept responsibility for the quality of the instruction in that program and all the pieces that go with it. You can't just pawn it off on somebody else. You know, and if your name is going on the degree, then you are the one responsible for the 25% rule. Did you have another question?
The institutions are offering the degree program as a group collaboratively, and they've vetted the faculty as a group. Do you still have to have 25% of the coursework taken from faculty of that institution that awards the degree?
If you have a program that has 30 semester hours in it, and institution A has in order to get a degree, there's 30 semester hours, institution B has 30 semesters, institution C has 30 semesters, but institution A and C are the only ones who are actually teaching those courses. When you have a formal collaborative agreement, what you have said is all 3 institutions have a course that has the same course number, the same title, the same description. All the faculty at all 3 institutions have gotten together and said, this is cool, and I as a student have no clue who's offering the class. All I know is I'm getting credit from this institution. In that case, because all those questions have been answered in that collaborative agreement, then you will meet the 25% rule because that's still your course. Does that make sense? Good.
Could you speculate? Hello.
Okay.
Could you speculate on what you think is going to happen in the short to medium term with the concept of the credit hour?
Well, I think it's already been shot out the water on many levels. You know, one thing that was interesting, when the Inspector General from the department came down to meet with us, because they came to SAC-COC, they went to Higher Learning Commission in North Central, they went to Middle States. We're the 3 largest of the regional accreditors. We have the largest student enrollment and the largest amount of federal financial aid used. So they figured if they ask us, then the other 4 would just fall into line. How do you define credit hour? We have been using the Carnegie unit since George Washington was president. Okay, but who wrote it down? You know, we don't have that written, but we knew that that's what it was. 1 hour in class, 2 hours outside of class equals 1 semester hour credit. We can memorize that in our sleep. But they wanted to see it in writing because the online institutions weren't meeting 1 hour in class and 2 hours outside. And so that's when they decided to put in writing that this is a definition of credit hour, and anything else you have to explain. We already had that in our standards, literally, in the southern region. So I didn't worry about it because we'd already taken care of that. Okay? Where is it going now? I think because now there is a door open where if you do something different, if you can explain it to your accreditor's satisfaction, then the department says, fine, you can use federal money. I think that the MOOCs are going to create a bigger problem for them. I think competency-based education is going to create a bigger problem because you don't have a way of knowing how much time in a seat someone is spending to earn that degree. And so while they'll let it go, there's going to be some other regulation like student authentication or something else that they're going to have to put in place to feel comfortable giving out their money. They can't just let the standard go somewhere. There's got to be some value placed on the amount of work done for a degree, whether it's 5 years in this profession equals 1 semester hour, whether it's, 15 jumps through the hoop, that they're going to have to do something, or they're going to be giving out money and they won't be able to accommodate it. And that puts more pressure on the accreditors because we're the ones who are monitoring that for them. But we do it because of rules they put in place. Yes.
Hi, I'm Angela Foster. I'm a student at Georgia Southwestern, but I'm also an employee, so the 2002 rule is news to me as well. But one of the questions,
That's okay.
one of the questions I have, because I attended a technical college, and the courses that I took then were not transferable. Now that I know this, although these courses are not offered at Georgia Southwestern no longer, at the college I'm attending, does that still apply to the university? They have to make those decisions.
Well, see, you all now have an agreement. What, the Georgia track something or other? What is it?
G-Tracks?
I think that's the one, where you have agreed in principle, the two chancellors got together and waved their magic wand or something and said, if you took a course that was historically not transferable at a SAC COC accredited institution, that they would transcript it on the Board of Regents side. Is that not correct? Yes. Okay. I'm sure there are exceptions.
Dr. Williams, 1 minute.
Okay, there is 27 specific courses that are listed. We don't expect from a technical college that a student would have all of those 27, but there are 27 possible. If you have a degree from there, you probably have 5 or 6 of those courses. And yes, if it's a SACS accredited technical college, it should come over.
Now, the senior institution or the four-year school has always had the ability to decide to accept a course whether the institution from which it came considered it transferable or not. Just like they've at least assumed the right to not accept credit even from those that were transferable. I mean, because there are a lot of, remember I told you that in Virginia we were in this one system and we wouldn't accept each other's credits, even though they were all for credit. I mean, they were transfer courses, we wouldn't accept them. So many institutions historically said, well, if you weren't from an accredited institution, then we weren't going to accept it. But we don't accept them from other accredited institutions. One of the questions that you're going to hear me raise over the next couple of years, bless you, is if all 810 member institutions in the southern region, because that's how many members we have, go through the same accreditation process and have to meet the same requirements, why don't we accept all of each other's courses? Nobody's been able to explain that one to this Lucy well at all. Okay? I mean, it just makes no sense. And I think this move that you all have now about if it's coming from another SAC COC accredited institution, at least for those 27 courses, then we'll buy into that. That's a major step forward on behalf of students. And I have been on this one-woman campaign to get you all to stop thinking of SACS as though it were a 4-letter word. And instead think of that acronym standing for Students Are Central to Success. Because that's really what we're talking about. We're talking about having strong institutions that offer stuff that students need to have a productive life as they come and matriculate, graduate, and leave. So, well, I don't have that course, but if you let them bring that course in, then I won't have enrollment in my course at this institution. It ain't about you. It ain't about you. It's about the students who come here. And if they can bring credits with them, that means they get out into the real world, pay taxes faster, and then you don't have to worry about your Social Security 20 years from now when you get ready to retire. Let them have the credit. Get over it. It's my political commentary for today. One last question before you leave for dinner. Thank you so much for including me, and good luck with dealing with this.